I am LaDonna Patton. I am a nurse consultant at the Alabama Board of Nursing, and we are recording today's presentation. I would like to thank the School of Nursing at Auburn University Montgomery for having us today and allowing us to make this recording. So today's subject, we're going to talk about how to submit an application to the Alabama Board of Nursing for licensure by examination, as well as an application to Pearson View and register with them in order to take the National Council Licensure Examination, or NCLEX. So the three things that we're going to take a look at today: why does the board exist legally, requirements for issuance of a license in Alabama, and the differences in the applications. The Alabama Board of Nursing was started in 1915, so it's 2015. This is the board's centennial year. The first state board exam happened in 1916. Then registration was voluntary, but now mandatory licensure is required in Alabama, as well as in, I believe, all states, as well as internationally. The Nurse Practice Act, y'all probably heard a lot about that, or you will in the future, as well as the rules, or the Alabama Board of Nursing Administrative Code. What the difference between those two are is that the Nurse Practice Act is the actual law or statute written by the legislature that guides the practice of nursing in Alabama. And the Alabama Board of Nursing Administrative Code is the rules written primarily by the board itself, with some legislative oversight of those rules, but it gets a little more specific as to the actual specific practices of nursing. That's where the standards and scope of practice for RNs and LPNs is located, responsibility and accountability, delegation, any specified requirements like to do with medication administration, documentation, IV therapy by LPNs, and any specialty practice areas such as RNFA, Registered Nurse First Assistant, for surgery, SANE, Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner, or Department of Mental Health, residential community programs, or group homes. The board does have specific rules regarding those things, as well as school nurses and delegation of medication administration in the school system. And so that's where that information is found, is in the rules, the administrative code. This is the board's current mission statement. The mission is to safeguard and promote the health, safety, and welfare of the public through licensing and approval of qualified individuals, that's going to be you guys, and adopting and enforcing legal standards for nursing education and nursing practice. So that licensing and approval of qualified individuals. So how does the board determine how someone is a qualified individual? And we'll look at that in some coming slides. Adopting and enforcing legal standards for nursing education. Y'all are in a nursing education program right now. And nursing practice. Now the board doesn't dictate exactly what you learn in your nursing program, but they do have some broad guidelines of things that should be included in the program. And schools of nursing, of course, have multiple bodies to answer to, not just the Board of Nursing, but their other accrediting agencies as well. Nursing practice, I just talked about some of those things in the rules, the delegation, the responsibility and accountability, the IV therapy by LPNs. That's the nursing practice, those standards that the board has written for nursing practice. And promoting the health, safety, and welfare of the public. The Board of Nursing is for the patient. Just as an individual nurse, you are a patient advocate. The Board of Nursing is for the patient. The Board of Nursing is not against nurses, but the board's there to ensure that only qualified people are practicing nursing. Y'all have worked hard to get where you are and to get a license in the future, so you want to make sure that everyone else that's holding themselves out to be a nurse has that same standard. So the Alabama Board of Nursing. This section right here, this Code of Alabama, that's the statute part. And this right here, the Alabama Board of Nursing Administrative Code, that's the rules part. Now those two don't necessarily go together, but just to differentiate what those look like. So the law has said that the board may examine, license, and renew the licenses of duly qualified applicants and require some other things by employers. So that examination and licensing, that's the part that's going to apply to y'all. And then the qualifications of applicants for licensure. So this is where someone has to really prove to the board that they are eligible to be a licensed nurse. They have to be a high school graduate or equivalent. Good moral character, and how that's determined is through some of the regulatory questions, and we'll look at some of those. Graduate of an Alabama or another jurisdiction's approved nursing program that substantially meets the same criteria as Alabama programs. There are folks that are licensed in other states that are ineligible for licensure in Alabama because their nursing program that they went to does not substantially meet the same requirements as an Alabama program. There has to be a valid Social Security number, have to be a citizen or a legal U.S. resident. Once you get a license, the reason that all of this is as it is because that's a property right, and there are some constitutional protections that go along with the issuance of a license, including due process. You have a right to a notice of charges and an opportunity for hearing if there are any allegations against your practice of nursing. And what is the public's perception of a licensed nurse? A nurse has specialized knowledge, independent judgment, fitness, and capacity to practice, and that's where that good moral character comes in, as well as in some criminal background checks. So, in order to apply for licensure by examination, I'm going to number these out. There are, I think, about 10. So step 1, graduate from nursing school. You're working on that. Number 2, determine where you will apply for your first nursing license. If you're planning to move, that's okay. You may still apply in Alabama and then endorse into another state, or you may choose to apply for licensure in that state. If that's the case, some of this stuff will not necessarily specifically apply to you, or it may, just depending, because a lot of states have pretty similar standards. Check your identification. You can see there's a red area about the names. Please know what name you are going to go by and make sure that your ID matches that name. I cannot stress that enough. Nursing is primarily a female-dominated profession, but it's great to see some guys back there. Hey. But the name issue does end up being a lot of a female issue. So ensure that the name that you are registering with the Board of Nursing, that you will register with Pearson VUE, that your ID matches that. And if it doesn't, now is the time to make those preparations. Your ID must be valid. It has to include the name, a recent photograph, as well as a signature. So again, take a look at that ID. Check those expiration dates. If it's coming close to expiring, think about an alternative form, maybe renewing it, and look at that photograph. If you look significantly different, like you had green hair and it's spiky, and now it's long and flowing and brown, then you might want to update that as well, because they want to make sure that the person that says that they're coming to test is actually who is showing up to test. Ensure, again, that your first, middle, and last names match exactly to the ID that you're going to use whenever you test. Step 4, visit the ABN website to find the NCLEX examination and application section. The website, there aren't any specific screenshots in here of where that is, because that website, of course, could change. We are working on some revisions in the future, so the web address, abn.alabama.gov, and you would look for the information regarding NCLEX examination. Be sure to read all pertinent requirements, FAQs, and instructions, and that little box down there, that's what you have to do in order to complete the online application. You have to actually check that box, and there's instructions that tell you that that's where you will begin the application process. So let's take a look at what some of the application actually looks like. This is the first screen that will come up. This is where you will select the license type, right there, whether or not you're a citizen, yes or no, and that Social Security number. The Social Security number is circled red because it is a requirement on the ABN application, but not a requirement on the Pearson VUE registration, but you still have to provide it. And we'll look at that in just a little bit. And then it asks about graduation from a program. If you select no, you're not going to be able to continue. But if you select yes, you're going to get additional information. And this is where you're going to enter in your name information, your address, and your other demographic information. Again, check your name. The application asks for last, first, middle, and maiden name. If you want to use your maiden name as your middle name, feel free. But again, you want to make sure it matches that ID. If you list it twice, if you're using your maiden name as your middle name and you want to list it twice, that's fine as well. But your license will be populated with the 3 names that you provide in first, middle, and last. Also, email address. The board, just like everywhere else, is becoming increasingly electronic, so ensure that your email address is updated at all times. The next section, you will select the education program. You can see that there are drop-down boxes, so that information is already programmed in there. Once you select the state, the approved programs from that state comes up, and you list that information in there. The graduation date, you can see there that that is circled in orange because that's a caution area. The graduation date needs to match what is on the transcript. So that information you would get from your school. And remember, step 1 is graduate from a nursing program. So you need to make sure that whatever you're putting on the graduation date section matches the transcript, because if it doesn't, that's going to slow up the processing of your application. Now this one kind of populates in 3 steps. So step 1, have you ever taken NCLEX-RN? Yes or no? If you say yes, you're not going to get the rest of that information in steps 2 and 3. If you say no, step 2 populates. Do you want a temporary permit? If you say no, step 3 is not going to populate. But if you say yes, then you're allowed to enter in the employer information there. If you do not have an employer yet, that's fine. You can still request that temporary permit. It will cost you extra, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. These are those regulatory questions. You can see there, kind of takes you through so you know where you're at with the application processing. There are, I believe, 9 regulatory questions, and they come up one at a time. So we're going to take a look at these. Have you ever been arrested for, been charged with, been convicted of, entered a plea of guilty to, entered a plea of nolo contendere, or no contest for, received deferred prosecution or adjudication for, had judgment withheld for, received pretrial diversion for, or pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity or mental defect to any crime other than a minor traffic violation in any state, territory, or country. Any crime related to driving while impaired or while under the influence of any substance is not a minor traffic violation. Wow, that's a really long question. What you need to take away from that is if you have ever been inconvenienced by law enforcement other than you ran a red light, you were pulled over speeding, you ran a stop sign, something like that, then you need to think back to what that circumstance was and figure out whether or not you were arrested. You may not have been convicted, but remember, have you ever been arrested, etc., etc., or any of the other things. So it doesn't, you don't have to necessarily receive a conviction to need to answer yes to this question. I'm spending some time on this because this is something that the board deals with a great deal, either of folks that do answer the question yes and have to have the application a little bit further reviewed, or fail to answer yes when they should have, because that in and of itself is a separate violation. Next question. In the past 5 years, have you abused alcohol, drugs, whether legal or illegal, prescribed or unauthorized, and or other chemical substances, or received treatment or been recommended for treatment for dependency to alcohol, drugs, and or any other chemical substances? So answering yes to any of these questions is not a bar to licensure. They're not an immediate bar to licensure. But this asks in the past 5 years. So that is 5 years from the time that you submit the application. If 5 years occurs a month later, then you want to think about, do I want to apply now or not? So those are questions that only you have the answer to. So read the questions carefully and answer them honestly. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on it, but if someone does enter into nursing with a past history of substance use, then there is a program where they may be able to enter into practice under monitoring without there being any permanent disciplinary action on the license. So that is an option in certain circumstances. And that program is called the VDAP program. Next question, yet another question about arrests or convictions, and this one asks specifically about DUI, drugs or alcohol. Doesn't always have to be alcohol. In the past 5 years, have you had or do you now have a physical or mental health problem that may impair your ability to provide safe nursing care? So this is going to come into play whenever someone may have been involuntarily committed, may have had a manic episode, some other type of psychotic break where their family had to intervene in them and they were involuntarily committed. If it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, again, read the question, answer the question as it is required to be answered, and provide the information. Again, none of that stuff is an immediate bar to licensure, and just like with the substance use history, mental health history may be one of those qualifying conditions that would get folks in, make them eligible for an alternative program. Number 5, has the licensing authority of any state, territory, or country denied, revoked, suspended, reprimanded, fined, accepted your surrender of, restricted, limited, placed on probation, or in any other way disciplined your nursing and or any other occupational license, registration, certification, or approval? So, if you're filling out this application, you most likely have never had a nursing license, but if someone had a CNA approval to practice, they were working as a CNA, or maybe they were a pharmacy tech, something like that, and they lost that ability to practice in that role for whatever reason, then this is where that information would need to be disclosed. Is the Board of Nursing or other licensing authority of any state, territory, or country, including but not limited to the Alabama Board of Nursing, currently investigating you? So, you would think if this is your very first initial application to Alabama, how could that possibly happen? But there have been times where folks have applied for licensure in another state, and based on a disclosure that they made there, they were placed under investigation and they were getting a little hold up on getting their license, so they decided to apply in an area nearby. Happens sometimes if you think about down on the coastline, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, you know, same thing. If you're up in one of the corners of the state, you have some neighboring states as well. So apply in one state, get held up a little bit because you make a disclosure, decide to apply in another state, and decide not to make that same disclosure that next time. So eventually they will find out, and that creates an issue. And again, not going to be an absolute bar to licensure, but it certainly is something that's going to hold up the processing of the application. Number 7, is disciplinary action pending against you with the Board of Nursing or other licensing authority of any state, territory, or country, including but not limited to the Alabama Board of Nursing? So if someone is working as a CNA in Georgia and they know that they're pending disciplinary action from the Georgia Regulatory Agency on their CNA approval to practice, this is where that question would be answered affirmatively because they know that there's something coming. Number 8, have you ever been placed on a state and or federal abuse registry? This does happen. Typically, if someone was working as a CNA, I'm not picking on CNAs. I was a CNA as well, but if someone was placed on an abuse registry, then that is information that would need to be disclosed to the board when applying for licensure. Number 9, has any branch of the armed services ever administratively discharged you with any characterization of service besides honorable and or court-martialed you? Yes or no? So if you answer yes to any of these questions, then you will have to provide additional information. We'll take a look at that in just a second. But you can see this next button didn't appear until we got to the end of those questions. And they do populate one at a time. You can go back and forth, previous if need be. So we could go previous or next. And in this case, we proceeded to the next question. And so then you would move on to the next section of the application, which is the preview. But if you did answer affirmatively to any question, it's going to tell you that. You answered yes to one or more regulatory questions. Your application will not be processed until we receive a detailed explanation and certified pertinent records related to your yes answer, and then continue with the application. So what are those required records? If it's court-related stuff, looking for a case action summary, that'll give the final disposition. If someone is still serving the requirements of the court, paying fines or fees or something like that, then a current status of that would be required. Treatment records, if someone has had previous treatment for substance use, if they're undergoing treatment for mental illness, compliant with the plan of care, and then for military, that DD-214. If any of these things require further investigation and will delay the processing of the application, then it is docketed at the board office, and the applicant would be issued a notice of investigation with a case number so that they would know what's going on. And processing of these cases is a high priority because, folks, again, the board's core mission is to license qualified individuals. And so processing those applications is a high priority. So we're at the preview section of the application. You can see that you're looking at all sections to ensure that everything is accurate. Again, checking that name, making sure that everything matches up. And then the payment part. $138.50 if you request a temporary permit, and $88.50 if not requesting a temporary permit. Now, this will be automatically populated, the name, whatever name that you put in there. And then this is your signature, that checkbox, that you agree to the terms and conditions mentioned above. So let's take a look at what that says. I affirm that the information recorded on this application concerning any and all items contained herein is true and correct. I understand that I may be required to submit documentation to support my affirmation. I further understand that any false statement is in violation of the Code of Alabama and the Alabama Board of Nursing Administrative Code and constitute cause for disciplinary action up to and including denial of my application for licensure. There are occasions that the board does deny applications for licensure. It may not necessarily be a permanent denial. The nurse or the applicant certainly could apply at a future date. And then all information will be considered again at that time. The temporary permit. It is issued one time only. It costs $50. We already saw that little extra cost on there. There are frequently asked questions on the ABN website regarding the temporary permit. It allows practice as a nursing graduate under the supervision of a registered nurse that is physically present in the facility and readily accessible to designate or prescribe a course of action when the nursing graduate is performing complex or advanced skills. The temporary permit, although it's valid for 90 days, it will immediately expire if the applicant takes the NCLEX and fails, if they take NCLEX and pass, because a license will be issued, or if the license were disapproved. That is going to be a rare circumstance that someone whose license would not be approved would be issued a temporary permit. You may want to think about, whenever you're applying for a temporary permit, whether or not it's going to work for you. And some questions to ask yourself would be, if you're already working in an unlicensed capacity and your employer has indicated interest in having you work in a licensed capacity and are willing to hire you on as a nursing graduate, then of course that would probably be beneficial to you. If you desire to become employed and earn money to be able to pay for that registration with Pearson VUE, because it is an additional cost. The timeline of application submission with the high graduation rates. We'll take a look at that near the end. Of course, you know, a lot of people graduate from college at the same times of the year, May and December, and then some other times in between. So if you're planning to apply with everybody in your class, and the school across town is applying as well, of course that's going to lengthen the application processing, so it may work out for you to have that temporary permit. But you may also want to consider your individual eligibility, whether or not you really want to pay that extra $50 if you think that you may not be eligible due to a past criminal history or substance use history. Again, there's no absolute bars for licensure, and the temporary permit is reviewed, eligibility is reviewed based on the application disclosures. Additional information for the application for licensure by examination. The transcript has to be received. The official transcript has to be received from the school before a license is issued, as well as before a temporary permit is issued. Again, that graduation date on the transcript has to match exactly what you've put on your application. And most schools are going to tell you this. Any affirmative responses to regulatory questions, there has to be the documentation received to explain those. The citizenship or legal presence. There are different checklists for different folks depending on how they're seeking licensure. This is, you can see this is the checklist for exam. It asks for school and things like that. Now, this process could be electronic or it could be paper, depending on how you and or your school process this. Ultimately, the license would be yours as the applicant. Some schools have instituted a process where they collect the citizenship paper as well as the supporting documentation, and that supporting documentation, it could be as simple as a copy of a driver's license. So some schools are collecting the document, the citizenship form or legal presence form, as well as the supporting documentation, and submitting that with the transcript. That is up to the school. Because we are recording this presentation, I'm not sure what your school does here at AUM or what any school that folks that may be watching would be doing. But that's the paper process. Now there's an electronic process as well. There's an email address up there that goes directly to a licensing individual that processes the citizenship. And y'all, it is as simple as printing out the paper, filling it out, You could put your driver's license or whatever document you have on top of that paper, take a picture of it with your phone, and email it if you have those capabilities. You would think that, you know, we do still accept mailed-in documents if you decide to do it that way. The electronic way is typically the quickest way. If there's any problems in reading it electronically, they can make it bigger. They put it in with your records. And if there were any problems in reading it or seeing it, then they would reply, you know, they have your email, then they would reply immediately and let you know, hey, I can't see this, we need to redo it. So I did just want to point that out. Depending on the school, they may ask for the paper, and that's fine. So, you know, it has to be received. Or if not, there is that electronic way that you can do it. Or again, you can always mail it. You can fax it, you certainly can, but after 80-something thousand folks that we've had to do in the last couple of years, faxing is challenging to see sometimes with this documentation. Step 10, for the application for licensure by examination, you have to apply with Pearson VUE. There is a link to this in the NCLEX section on the ABN website. You would select the Pearson VUE registration and create an account. There's a candidate bulletin on there. They have lots of tutorial videos, and they go over the palm vein usage for identification. Pearson VUE is not an entity of the Board of Nursing, but they administer the NCLEX exam. Pearson VUE has 8 steps, so there were 10 steps for the Board of Nursing, one of which being applying with Pearson VUE, and so now there are 8 steps. Step 1, apply for licensure with the ABN. We've just went over how to do that. You can see there the cost ranges from $88.50 to $138.50, depending on whether or not you're getting a temporary permit. Register and pay the exam fee to Pearson VUE, $200. Let me point out at this point in time, all payments of fees to the Board of Nursing and to Pearson VUE are non-refundable. So, again, that's where you want to check and make sure that that name matches, because if you've registered with the board under one name and your ID don't match and you show up to test, you're not going to be allowed to test. You will receive an acknowledgement of receipt of that registration by email from Pearson VUE. ABN then notifies Pearson VUE of your eligibility to test, so they work in concert together. You would then receive that authorization to test by email from Pearson VUE that is eligible. It gives you a 90-day testing window. Schedule the exam appointment, arrive for the test, and then take the test. They left that part out. And receive the testing results. So this is what that screen looks like. Lots of agreeing to policies about cookies and use of CCTV for the monitoring of the testing session. If you do not answer no, if you do not answer yes, or if you answer no, you will not proceed. You have to create a web account. Again, if you'll notice the red arrows, there are sections. It has the star for the first name and last name, and email being mandatory fields. But you can see there as well, there is that section for middle name. If you're going to use a middle name on the ABN application, ensure that you do it here as well. There's a place a little bit later on for a maiden name, so depending on how you choose to put your name, middle, maiden, if you have a name in addition to the maiden name, that's up to you. But again, make sure that the first, middle, and last right here match exactly what you put on the ABN's application. Now, again, same thing. Remember the name. Important, important, important. Can you tell that we have a lot of problems with names? Step 2, in creating the account, further demographic information, address. This error message or the note has to do with international testing. I realize that these things are small, but hopefully you can see it okay. Creating the account, there's the place for the maiden name as well as the place for the Social Security number. You can see it is not a required field for Pearson VUE, but it is for the ABN, so you must make sure those applications match. First, middle, last name, and Social Security number. If you have any errors with your registration, that's what you get, that you will be contacted for further clarification. And that's as far as we're able to go for the purposes of this, because there is significant test and registration security. But that's as simple as how the screens go. So, again, what is your process as an applicant, as a future applicant? You would see there that it's kind of simultaneously that you're applying for licensure and then apply and register with Pearson VUE. And then Pearson VUE is going to send you that acknowledgement of registration and that authorization to test after the board has determined your eligibility. See, it's a joint process there. So all of this, eligibility granted, all those regulatory questions that we went through, that's where that comes in. So that eligibility may not be granted until even after disciplinary action has been assessed on the application. So it's going to depend on what your individual circumstances are, what the application includes as to when that eligibility gets granted. So some folks might not test for 6, 8, 9 months or so until, after they've graduated, depending on how the process takes. So that authorization to test, again, is not going to be issued until the board has granted that eligibility. So what exactly is NCLEX? It's the test that y'all have been studying so hard to pass. It is the National Council Licensure Examination selected by the board and other jurisdictions, as the test has to be passed prior to license issuance. It is psychometrically sound and legally defensible, and it is administered utilizing computerized adaptive testing. There are lots of videos on the Pearson VUE NCSBN website regarding the entire process, and there is a video on there about the computerized adaptive testing, and that's actually what these are snippets from. So you can see here that the passing standard is identified on each section. And then this person gets lots of questions and they're staying a lot above the passing standard. Whereas this person they're getting some questions right, but they're not getting questions at the passing standard right. So that person's failing. And so that's how the testing works in a nutshell. The video is only like 6 minutes. I would encourage you to watch it if you have an opportunity. A little bit more information on NCLEX. Bloom's taxonomy is used as the basis for NCLEX test construction because nursing, the practice of nursing requires the application of knowledge, skills, and abilities. So we're looking at that purple level right there. The test also includes other things fundamental to the practice of nursing, including the nursing process, caring, communication and documentation, and teaching and learning. This information is publicly available on the NCSBN Pearson VUE website about what all is included in the NCLEX test. So you can see lots of different sections, but this piece right here, so that's about 1/4 of the test, is the safe and effective care environment. Health promotion and maintenance is a small piece. Psychosocial integrity is another small piece. And then physiological integrity is about half of the test. Now this is the RN test plan, and it includes, you can see there, parenteral therapies in this test plan. Now The next slide, we are going to take a look at the LPN test plan. I realize that y'all are BSN students, but we're filming a video, so we're going to try to make it all-inclusive. Otherwise, I'd have to do it again. The PN test plan is pretty similar. Again, got that big chunk, about a quarter, a little over, that has to do with management of care, health promotion and maintenance, psychosocial integrity, and then the physiological integrity. But the pharmacological therapies here, you can see, does not include the parenteral therapies. The NCLEX is based on client needs, whether it be the RN or the PN test, and those are the safe and effective care environment, the health promotion and maintenance, psychosocial integrity, and the physiological integrity. Related content under each section, that safe and effective care environment, the health promotion and maintenance, you can see there that delegation is only in the RN section, but that's important because as an RN you may be working with PNs, and so it's important to know a little bit about what they learn and what they are tested on. You can see that it's really kind of through the age group because you've got postpartum and newborn care, the developmental stages, so that whole pie chart includes everything through all age groups, all of those things that you've been learning anyway. Mental health concepts, coping, mobility and assistive devices, medication administration. So again, that's going to be specific to the scope of the test, RN or PN, vital sign changes, those non-pharmacologic comfort interventions, a lot of those nursing interventions. Any special accommodations for testing are determined with the ABN as well as with Pearson VUE. They work together, so those requests do have to be made in writing at the time of application for licensure, and that is further detailed in the ABN Administrative Code 610X4-.05. Final points, application differences. I've said it multiple times, so y'all know by now, Social Security number, first, middle, last name. Please make sure that they match. Please don't waste your money. The application confirmation number comes from Pearson VUE, not the ABN. You get that once the application has been submitted. You'll use that to check official test results online. Nobody wants to check their test results that quick, right? I'm kidding. And you can see that the board does license over 4,200 exam applicants annually. So you can see when the bulk is, so that may help you to make your decision as to whether or not you want to spend the money on a temporary permit, what your timeline of becoming employed in a licensed capacity would be as well. Always keep all of your contact information updated with the Board of Nursing. We renew licenses every couple of years. Folks change their names, they change where they live during that time period, and always keep that information updated because if you don't, then we can't reach you if we need to reach you. There are electronic communication listservs that the board will email folks out, so if you've signed up and we have your information, then you'll get information like that. These rules that you've heard me talk about, the administrative code, the board does look at those periodically, and any time that they're looking to change anything, they do post those. So, I mean, it's up for public comment, and they do look at each and every comment, and depending upon the circumstances of the rule, they may even discuss it further and invite people to come and look at that. So that's kind of how you can be involved in nursing really at the front lines from here on out. This concludes the presentation.